Welcome back to my course, College Level Sociology. Today we will be discussing Chapter 1. So, a sociologist mainly recognizes and understands diversity. This is one of the biggest themes in sociology. Our gender, our social class, our marital status, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and age, among other factors, shape our own beliefs, our own behaviors, and our experiences. For example, if you're a white middle-class male who attends a private college, your experience is very different from that of a female Vietnamese immigrant who's struggling to pay expenses at a community college. Your experiences are vastly different, and your behaviors and beliefs may also vary. So what critical sociological thinking does when you're a sociologist or just studying sociology is that they rely on reason rather than emotion. They also ask questions and avoid snap judgments and examine popular and unpopular beliefs, almost like master narratives and narratives that are counter narratives, which counter the master narratives but are less popular and common. Also, critical sociological thinking involves recognizing one's own and others' assumptions, prejudices, and points of view. They also remain open to alternative explanations and theories. They also examine competing evidence for their theories and understand how public policies affect private troubles. So now we will look at the fathers and mothers of the sociology we know today, who formed the basic ideologies of sociology in the 1800s and the 1900s and formed the basis for our very own degree that we have now, sociology. So the first father of sociology I would like to talk about is Auguste Comte. He's from the 1800s, and he was the first person to coin the term sociology, and he's highly valued as the person who discovered and created sociology. So he came up with this theory that the study of society must be empirical, which means that it should be based on observations and experiments rather than the religion and intuition, rather than basing off your beliefs off of your religion and just snap judgment. He also spent a lot of time studying social statics and how social order explains a particular society and its social dynamics, and how social dynamics is basically how change happens over time. For example, this is the relationship between education and politics. That is an example of social statics. But how the interconnections between education and politics change over time is an example of social dynamics. The next person I would like to talk about is Harriet Martinez. This person is also from the 1800s, and they're an English author who published books on social science, and politics, and even literature topics. This person mostly translated Comte's work and widely spread it and disseminated it among the common audience. Harriet emphasized the importance of data collection in a systematic manner and objective analysis of this data to explain events and behaviors. It cannot be subjective, because then your opinions and your biases may be used to explain the results, which is a no-no for sociology. So Harriet published the first sociology research methods textbook and was also a feminist and staunch opposer of slavery, who promoted improvising workplace conditions and women's position in the workplace. Martineau described, after a long-term tour in the United States, that American women were being socialized to be subservient and dependent rather than equal marriage partners. She also criticized American and European religious institutions for expecting women to be pious and passive rather than educating them in topics such as philosophy and politics and letting them join the workforce in places which were common for men to be among. And many scholars, even sociologists at the time, ridiculed and dismissed her ideas as much too radical. The next person I would like to talk about is Emil Durkheim. next person was from the 1900s, and they were a French sociologist and a writer who agreed with the topics expressed by Auguste Conte, that societies are characterized by unity and cohesion because their members are bound together by common interests and attitudes. Emil spent most of his time studying social facts, which are basically aspects of social life that extend to individuals and they're possible to be measured. An example of this is a communication process between individuals. Emil also believed in the division of labor, which is an interdependence of different tasks and occupations, and it's characteristic of industrialized societies, and that it produces social unity and facilitates change. He also believed in social integration. He concluded that people who experience meaningful social relationships in families, social groups, and communities are less likely to commit suicide than those who feel alone, helpless, or hopeless. Thus, many seemingly isolated individual acts, including suicide, are often the result of structural arrangements such as weak social ties. The next person I hope to talk about is Karl Marx. He is perhaps most famous for the introduction of communism theory, and he lived during the 1800s. He's a German social philosopher who tried to explain how society changed during the Industrial Revolution. He mainly expressed that economic issues produce divisiveness rather than social solidarity, and he also talked about capitalism in a broad sense with three defining terms. The first being capitalists. Capitalists are the ruling elite who own the means of producing wealth, such as factories, for example. The second is the petite bourgeois. They're the small business owners and workers who still have their own means of production, but might end up in the proletariat because they're driven out by competition and their businesses fail. The proletariat is the third bullet point of capitalism, and they are the masses of workers who depend on their wages to survive, and they have few resources and make up the working class. And an example of this is that workers feel alienated because they don't own or control either the means of production or the product. And also, the major focus in such a capitalist economy is on increasing profits as much as possible, rather than feeling connected to the products or services they sell. The next person is Max Weber. He's also from the 1900s, and he's a German sociologist and economist who mainly discussed the topic of social organization and how there's a necessity for a subjective understanding of behavior and value-free society. And a complete understanding of society requires an analysis of the social organization and interrelationships among economic, political, and cultural institutions. In his book, Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, for example, Weber argued that the self-denial fostered by Calvinism, it supported the rise of capitalism and shaped many of our current values about working hard. He also developed the topic of Verstehen, which means subjective understanding, and this involves knowing how people perceive the world. And value-free sociology is another one of his ideologies, and that's that separate personal values, opinions, and beliefs from scientific research do exist. And he also claims that education was meant to be dispassionate and only to teach students knowledge and scientific expertise, rather than imprinting the teacher's personal political and ideological judgments on the children. In this case, the teacher's bias would extend to their students and even children, and they would continue with the legacy of the teacher's ideologies rather than perhaps creating some of their own or extending it to create one that is more commonly viewed. Another person we would like to talk about is Jane Addams. She lived during the 1900s and she founded Hull House, which is a settlement house in Chicago to serve the neighborhood poor. She was an active reformer and a leader in the women's suffrage movement, and in 1931, she even received the Nobel Peace Prize for negotiation rather than war as an option to settle disputes. She's been published in many scholarly journals on everyday life of urban neighborhood and the effects of social disorganization and immigration, even though she did experience a lot of discrimination for being a woman at the University of Chicago. Webb Du Bois is another sociologist and reformer from the 1900s, and he's the first African American to ever have received a Harvard PhD. He also helped found the NAACP, which is a national association for the advancement of colored people. He believed that the race problem in the United States was very ignorant-based, and he advocated for a cure for this prejudice and discrimination. He was also dismissed as radical because at his time, even blacks expected that they were to be patient and wait for this change to come about, rather than acting on impulse and trying to achieve change. Now that we have discussed many of the prominent people in the sociology field, we'd like to talk about the 4 main topics in sociology today. The first theory is functionalism. Functionalism basically means that society is a complex system of interdependent parts which work together to ensure society's survival. Comte and Durkheim believed human behavior results from social structures of order, and even Herbert Spencer, a modern sociologist, compares a functionalist society to a body. And this is because a body has many intricate parts like the lungs, the nervous system, the skeletal system, and the skin. They all work together to achieve the same purpose, even though they're doing work of their own. They're all working to keep you alive and functioning in the best way possible. Another example of each structure in an environment fulfilling certain functions is the purpose of education, for example. It's to transmit knowledge to the young, to teach them to be good citizens, and to prepare them for jobs in their later on life. However, dysfunctions in the functionalist society are patterns with negative social impact. When one part of the society doesn't work, it affects the other parts, just like the body, where one part doesn't work, the lungs, for example, your body is unable to function because you're unable to breathe. There are 2 types of other functions. There's manifest functions and latent functions. Manifest functions are intended and recognized. They're clearly evident. But latent functions are unintended and not immediately obvious. One critique of the functionalism theory is that it glosses over widespread inequality that powerful people create and maintain. That powerful people control the functions of society and make it so that they are the ones who benefit. And in contrast to functionalism, a theory called conflict theory was created, and this examines how and why groups disagree, struggle over power, and compete for scarce resources. The main questions in conflict theory is who benefits and who loses in functionalism. Conflict theorists see society as inequality and that it is rampant in the society, and the society isn't as cooperative and harmonious as functionalists make it out to be. And this is based on the WASP, which is the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male. And this is because they dominate political and economic decision-making in the United States. They control a variety of institutions like education, media, and government. And this is what conflict theorists try to find in our current system. Another theory common in sociology is feminist theory. And the basic premise of this theory is that women have been subject to, and still are subject to, social, economic, and political inequality. This theory basically asserts that people should be treated fairly and equally, regardless of their sex, and also even of other characteristics such as race, ethnicity, national origin, age, religion, class, sexual orientation, and even disability. More specifically, feminist theories describe that women should be freed from traditionally oppressive expectations, constraints, roles, and behaviors. And they take on many different stances. The liberal feminists endorse social and legal reform for equal opportunities. The radical feminists believe that male dominance is the reason that women suffer. And global feminists describe how the intersection of gender with race, social class, and colonization has exploited women in the developing world. The next and last final theory is symbolic interaction theory, although many of you probably know this as interactionism. It examines everyday behavior through communication of knowledge, ideas, beliefs, and attitudes. Whereas functionalists, conflict theorists, and even some feminist theorists emphasize structures and large macro systems, symbolic interactionists focus on process and keep the person at the center of the analysis. It's almost like a microsystem. And the premises of symbolic interaction theory is that our actions are based on social interaction in the sense that people take each other into account in their own behavior. We act differently in different social settings and continuously adjust our behavior, including our body language as we interact. For example, our demeanor in the workplace or during an interview is very different than when we're hanging out and relaxing with friends at a bowling alley. Symbolic interaction looks at subjective interpersonal meanings and how we interact and influence each other by communicating through symbols. Symbols can include words, gestures, or pictures that stand for something, and that can have different meanings and agreed upon definitions. However, a critique of sociology theory of symbolic interaction is that it overlooks the macro level factors that actually do affect micro level factors like individuals. And that's it for Chapter 1. Be on the lookout for Chapter 2 online lesson coming soon. The topic for this next chapter will be examining our social world. Thanks for listening and make sure to like and subscribe. Bye!